Hi, everyone, and welcome to Grow Great Live. I'm your host, Ria Lala, and joining me is Antonia Dodge and Mariana Pollack. And today we're talking about a really fascinating and a really relevant subject, which is creativity, and why building creativity in your children is so vital right now. So excited to get the panel's view on this topic. So let's start with Antonia. Antonia, can you tell us what feelings are conjured up with creativity, and why do you feel creativity is so vital for our children, especially right now?
Well, I think we generally acknowledge as parents that creativity is important for our kids. I think, though, we define creativity just a little differently. And from my perspective, and a lot of, especially as applied to, my daughter and my stepkids, creativity isn't just finger painting. It's not just being able to color or, like be able to express themselves. Creativity is it's a skill you build. It's a muscle you exercise. And over the course of time, what creativity eventually becomes is the ability to problem solve in a very special way. As an adult, when we're considered creative adults, we're generally considered people who can problem solve in a way that requires flexibility, adaptability, and figuring out how to, solve a problem or a challenge without the conventional tactics. So if that's ultimately the end game, is to become the kind of adult that can do that, then creativity in children takes on a new form. It's not just being able to color with lots of different colors. It's, okay, so how do I put my kid in a context where they can build the skill of problem solving outside of conventional ways? And so there's a lot of different styles of creativity then. It's not just painting. There's a lot of free form expression that you can throw your child or encourage your child to explore. And I think one of the reasons why I personally believe it's so vital to make sure that you create a context where that form of creativity is being fostered is that, for the long time, especially in last century, you can see how all of society was set up to create what is basically the modern form of the factory worker. So like the early time periods, it was actually factory workers that we were trying to, create, because we had a high need in our culture for factory workers. But then towards the end of last century, like the 80s and 90s, it became more like the office version of the factory worker, where you did a lot of data input, or you did a lot of basically, pencil pushing. But those kinds of jobs are more and more being, taken care of by computer programs. A lot of those styles of jobs are being, shipped overseas to other cultures. And so what has happened in our culture is that a new class of people has emerged. It's called the creative class. Lots and lots and lots of content is written on this subject. Lots of books talk about the creative class. And it feels like society is going the direction where we're almost always going to be needing knowledge workers and creative class workers in the future. And by the time our kids get into the workforce, the ability to just, take orders, the ability to just do your rote assignments, that isn't going to be the skills that they're looking for. They're going to be looking for people who can think outside the box, who can problem solve in very unique ways. They're going to be looking for those kinds of people. And so if we want to prepare our kids for the future that's coming, not the future we've seen in the past, not the future that we grew up with being told to us, but actually the real future that's coming down the pike, fostering that skill, exercising the muscle of creativity is going to be vital for them.
Yeah, excellent.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a life skill. It's a life skill, and I agree with you when you say that it's not just finger painting, it's not just painting or drawing or anything like that. And I'll give you an example. My older boy, he was in a creative arts class at school, and he, had a belief that he just cannot draw to save his life. And he would just say, I'm not creative, I'm not creative, I'm not creative. And, you can see how repeating that mantra over and over again could, create a belief in him that he is not creative, when that's just a tiny fraction of the, life skill called creativity. And the teacher said, of course you're creative, you can do all these other things. And sure enough, when he tried himself in writing, he can really, really write nicely. He always gets A's in writing the assignments. He was featured, in the, I forgot what's the name of it, across the United States. One of his essays ended up in top 20. So he found himself there. And I can also tell you that he's very creative when he needs to negotiate something with us, whether it's to buy new cleats for soccer or some music or new headphones or things like that. And same with the younger boy as well. He is very creative when it comes to, asserting himself and think of the different ways how they can, just make their lives better. So I agree that it's a life skill that needs to be fostered, and it's a life skill that needs to be appreciated, and also a skill that we want to make sure that our kids don't believe that they have it, as opposed to trying one thing and thinking, oh, that's it, I'm just not creative. And it's not just sitting and saying, okay, I'm going to create something, I'm going to create a new product, I'm going to create a new picture, I'm going to create a new essay, I'm going to create this. Creativity comes natural throughout the day. We create throughout the day with tiniest little things that we sometimes are not even aware of. So maybe starting with ourselves as parents and seeing in which way we are creative, and then also teaching our kids, oh, you just did that, that's creativity. I think it's important having that awareness, and then relating it to our children as well.
No, that's really good. When I think of creativity, I'm thinking about the ability somebody has to create an original idea that adds value. That's my definition of creativity. And creativity, as we've, comes in many different forms. There's, you can write, you can dance, you can do music. So it's not what, Antonia, when you mentioned finger painting, you're right. It's not just about finger painting. It's about all the different forms that creativity comes in. And when we look at historically, how our society's been, and Antonia, you touched upon this, we went from an agrarian agricultural society, it moved into an industrial society. We're going to talk about education in a bit, about what even created schools that has stolen the creativity from it, and that was mainly because of the industrial era. Mm-hmm. But then we've moved into knowledge-based workers in the past, and now we really are moving into a conceptual age. And in this conceptual age, we talk about the creative class. The reason why I think it's so important is because when we think about, just think about what we do on the net every day. If I wanted to get a divorce, I can download my own, how to get a divorce off the internet. If I want to do my tax, I just have to go to TurboTax and get it. And so in this world, global economy, it's going to be far more than things that are getting outsourced to different countries all around the world. What's going to separate the kids is when everything's at your fingertips and everything you can almost do yourself, or you can outsource it somewhere cheaper, which is happening a dime a dozen. How can we build the skill in our kids so that they can think outside of the box? And really, I don't know if it's become a punchline, think outside of the box. And I don't think we've ever really explained what it means to think outside of the box. But one thing I do want to say about creativity for sure is with young children, in order to have original ideas, like if creativity, if we're going to stick with that definition for a moment, if creativity is about having an original idea that adds value to the world, one thing that is paramount for children to have, for school systems to embrace, and for parents to embrace, is to let children make mistakes and be okay with getting things wrong. Because a child that does not make mistakes, where mistakes are not celebrated around the dinner table, at school, that child is not going to feel to be creative. Because to be creative means to take a chance. It's not to fill the box with the answer the teacher wants. And I think what we really have to look at is how unconsciously and consciously we are stealing away from our children that creative impulse. We believe that all children are born jade. I believe that all children are born creative geniuses. I think Picasso, and I'm going to brutalize his quote, but all children are born artists. The question is how to remain an artist once they grow up. And what happens in school systems and us as parents unconsciously, through wanting our child to get it right versus take a chance and make a mistake and allow your creative impulse to show, because from that all things can flourish. And I'd love to hear, Antonia, what are your thoughts on that, and what's coming up for you?
So one of my favorite, he was actually a business professor. His name is Russell Ackoff. He has this entire philosophy that he calls mistakes of omission versus mistakes of commission. He says because mistakes of commission, that is like the mistakes we actively make, because those are trackable and observable to the outside world, we tend to monitor those so closely that every time somebody makes a mistake of commission, they actually do something wrong, we penalize them. But mistakes of omission, which is a mistake of commission is when you did the wrong thing. A mistake of omission is when you should have acted and you didn't. So you just stood in the sidelines and you did nothing when you should have actually acted. He indicates that when you really look at the mistakes of omissions that big businesses make, they are almost always 10 times more costly than mistakes of commission. When a business should have acted and they didn't, that is almost always way, way, way more costly. But it's not trackable. It's not as easily observable. So what ends up happening is, as adults, we do this to each other, and we do it so much more to our children. But we penalize mistakes of commission, whereas a mistake of omission isn't penalized at all. So we, as humans, learn that the safest thing that we can do is to do nothing. Right? We just sit in the sidelines, we don't do anything because we don't want to get penalized for our mistakes. And when we bring that dynamic, because we experience that dynamic as parents, right? Like in the workforce, with our friends, we said the wrong thing and now our friend is really pissed off at us and now we have to go make amends, right? When if we had, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, right? Omit, right? We get all this propaganda about omitting. And then we pass that down to our kids, and so our kids learn, okay, so if I'm going to make a mistake, first of all, I've got to hide it. And second of all, the safest thing for me to do is to do nothing. And that means no creativity, no figuring things out through those mistakes, right? Like no figuring things out by actually, behaving in a way that goes, okay, so I made a mistake there and this is what went wrong. So the next time I can do it better, right? Like if we don't do that, we just do nothing. And we just put down the answers on the test exactly as they wanted us to put the answer on the test, right? Because we get rewarded for that. And we don't do anything that we know we'll get penalized for because we don't really want to get punished. So what you're talking about is this societal concept of mistakes of omission versus mistakes of commission. And as a society, we have a don't do anything outside the box, don't do anything, like you're mentioning, we've got to define those terms, but we don't do anything that's out of the norm, we don't do anything that we could be penalized for, and so we end up doing nothing, which is why we have people who run our world who have no interest in problem solving, right? Like there are so many problems in the world that we have the resources, manpower, and intelligence and creativity to solve, but we don't do that, right? Because we might make a mistake and then we'll get penalized for it. So it's an entire culture of that, and effectively what we're doing is we're teaching our children to be passively just garbage. Like we live in a world where we just accept the lowest common denominator, we accept all this garbage that comes our way, we accept all these unconscionable problems. Malnutrition, 5,000 children a day dying of malnutrition, that's unconscionable. But as humans, we just okay, that's not something I can do anything about. That's not something I can solve. The safest thing for me to do is just focus on my world and not make any mistakes there. So we have this I think as a society, we have this concept, and we pass that down to our kids, and it strips them of their creativity. It strips them of their ability to problem solve, to create something new of value, because they fear that if somebody doesn't see the value right away, this new thing will actually be punished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what you're talking about reminds me of the movie Divergent. I don't know if you guys seen it. It's basically, we've seen it again. We recommend it, and we've seen it again over this weekend. It's basically the war happened, and in I don't know how many hundreds of years from now, and the only society that survived was around that we know from the movie was around the Chicago area, and they are divided in order to keep the peace. They're divided into 5 factions, and they're based on personality. So the kids grow up and they do the test on them. And basically, every person is predestined to go into one of the factions. And each faction does certain things. So one of them is candor. They always speak, freely and always speak the truth. The other one is erudite. They're all about logic and reason. And then there's amity. They're farmers and, and so on and so on. So everybody belongs into a faction. If you don't fit the faction, then you're factionless, and you basically live on the street. And it's all order in order to keep the peace. Now, every now and then, a divergent comes along, which is a person who does not fit any faction. And actually, not that they're not fitting any faction, it's because they are actually have all the factions within them, which means that they are totally thinking outside of the box. They're totally thinking outside of the faction, outside of any kind of norm that is given on them, and they're able to basically make their way throughout the society with a higher level of thinking, with the outside of the box thinking. However, the ruling party, so to speak, they don't like people like that because they can think for themselves. They don't belong to the norm of the society. So, which means that that's one of the ways that in nowadays, if you want to make a correlation between the two, in nowadays, like you said, Antonia, if you don't check the box, you get punished. You get a lower grade. You immediately get a counsel. What is happening with this kid? They don't listen. They're not studying. If you don't answer correctly in an job interview process, you're not the candidate that we're looking for. If you don't answer correctly, in the business setting, or you just kind of start throwing different ideas outside of the box, they might think that you're crazy and you will drive the business to the ground. So there are many, many ways of how we are stomping on creativity. But I would love to hear, what are some of the ways that we can foster creativity? How can we allow our children, like you said, to make mistakes and to be okay with it, and even have some tools for the parents, what to do to encourage kids to be creative and make mistakes and not be punished.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's definitely something that we want to leave all of our viewers with. This is a really great how-to. I'd love to just offer a few of them. As I mentioned, celebrating mistakes is not something that comes just intuitively to celebrate mistakes, because we're so focused on winning and getting it right. And we've been institutionalized as well. I mean, we've gone through our public systems and we want our kids to, get answers right. And then we have to bring to our attention, wait a second, what is it that I really want for my kids? What am I trying to create? What type of environment? So celebrating mistakes begins, I think, right at the dinner table, where one thing that we do with our kids every night is they talk about one thing that they took a chance on, not something they got wrong. What did you take a chance on today, but it didn't work out for you? And then we go around, like my husband does it, I do it, the kids do it, and then they say it. And they'll say, well, I asked a question and it was like, or I tried to spell this word and it didn't work out. And then we all go, all right, hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray. And then they're smiling. They're smiling at where they took a chance and it didn't work out. So that's something that we do every night, where we didn't do right. And now they're now in the world hunting in their day for, hey, I have something to share, because it's become a ritual in the household. So they're just the way internally they feel about how they go about making a mistake, if we want to call it that, or taking a chance, knowing that they get to come home in the safety of our family and share it in the place that they want to feel like lean back and feel protected, they're going to get that. The other thing is, I think, sharing, really, really important, is sharing where we as parents make mistakes. Because bearing in mind, our kids always see us in perfection. Mariana, if your husband is kicking a ball into a net with the kids, he probably doesn't have to try that hard. He can get the ball into the net, If Antonia, if your daughter is seeing your husband throw a basketball into a net, she's seeing, or do a math, or something like a math equation or something, she's able to see it very simple. Pour a glass of water, very simple stuff. But our kids aren't used to seeing us struggle. And when kids are used to seeing their parents struggle and watch it, bring their attention to it as you're struggling, take a class where you're struggling and share the process by which we ended up getting this well, then I think this is also a very important part of creativity, is that children learn the difference, like Carol Dweck talks about this, between growth mindset and fixed mindset. Growth mindset being, hey, our brain is plastic, we can change, everything's a process, we can learn the process. Fixed mindset is how I am is how I am. I either have the gift of the gab or I don't. I'm either good at math or I'm not. I'm either good at spelling or I'm not. And that is where we can use our conversations by how we are, climbing up that mountain of Everest to try and get better, learn more, how we can share that process with our kids. I didn't always know how to do, the square root of an angle or whatever. I can't remember. That's probably incorrect. I couldn't always do the square roots. But the thing is, if I can show my kids what I did and talk about my pains and my struggle and my frustration, now they're like their god and goddess in their life can go, oh, mom struggled with it. She didn't always have it right. And that growth mindset, there's a process. And if I understand that everything has a process, I can get better. And part of that is taking a chance. Part of that is not getting it right. And let's celebrate when we don't get it right. That is a victory. Because just like Edison said, when he 10,000 times tried to make a light bulb, he goes, well, how do you feel? He goes, well, I don't feel like I failed. I learned 10,000 ways of how not to make a light bulb. That's the perspective switch. Antonia, what were your thoughts?
So I remember reading this someplace that there was an online thread, I think it was on reddit.com, where they were talking about how to turn your children into readers. And the most upvoted comment, because Reddit aggregates people's comments and upvotes and downvotes based on their quality, and the most upvoted, highest quality comment was, if you want to turn your children into readers, put books all around the house and read in front of them. like that's how you turn your kids into readers, right? You do it in front of them and you make it available. And it's the same thing with, we're talking about creativity in the terms of celebrating mistakes, which is fantastic. It's also them seeing you be creative. So it's hard to do that. Like, I have a very creative job, right? My job basically, or my business, entails me writing blog posts all the time, creating content, looking for interesting, like conversing with people and answering their questions around personality typology. And so I actually have a very creative job, like where I'm creating new content all the time. And it gets exhausting at the end of the day. Like, at the end of the day, I'm just like, I just want to veg out and do nothing. I want to be passively entertained. I don't want to do anything creative at all. And yet my daughter's not sitting next to me observing me be creative in my job, right? Like, because I'm sitting, as far as she's concerned, I've got my nose into my laptop, and that's all she sees. So it's difficult to remember to be creative around her, because by that point I'm creative out. Like, I don't want to be creative anymore. And yet I have to, in front of her, show her creativity. So we'll just do simple things. She's 2.5. We do a lot of playing with blocks. She loves blocks, so I'll go play with blocks, and we'll do different configurations. And of course, we knock them down because that's the most pleasurable part. And then we do different different creativity constructions with blocks and Legos, big Legos, and that kind of thing. I color with her because that's the stage that she's at. I do everything I can to show her examples of creativity, but then she also sees that, and this is I think, very easy way to be creative, is we move the furniture in the house around a lot. We're always looking for new configurations of moving the furniture around. And so we just redid her bedroom again, right? And it wasn't like a big expense, because it was mostly moving furniture around like Tetris, right? And so she's always seeing us sort of try new things out and hang lights, like Christmas lights, even if it's not Christmas time, like fairy lights around. And try new colors out and put scarves in new places and change the house up, right? It's not that big of a deal, but and you could argue that is destabilizing, but it's all the same furniture, it's just in a new configuration. And we get really excited about it. Okay, we did your room different, like that was the thing that was in that room, but now it's in your room. And we talk about like what she would like in her room and changing it around, etc. I actually try to clean out toys as much as possible. I try to remove toys from her. I don't want her to have like this enormous pile of toys. What I'd like her to be is creative with the few amount of toys that she has. And that's another thing, is that when we have a toy and she's not interested anymore, I sit down with her and I say, well, what else could we do with this toy? Like, what's a new way that we could play with this toy, as opposed to getting a new toy? So I think as a parent, it's difficult to remember to do that because of the situation I'm in. And yet, the best way to teach her how to be creative is to model it for her in front of her. And as she gets older, one of the best things that I can do is to just get out of her way. We're talking about Picasso, all children are born artists. It's just how long you remain an artist. Creativity is flowing like crazy through a kid. That's how they're learning. Like, that's how we're wired to learn as children. So it's really not a matter of Yeah, it's not a matter of like making sure that we're setting up our, our house in the most creative way possible necessarily. It's how the hell do we get out of the way? Like, how do we make sure that we're just not killing it? How do we remove ourselves from the equation enough to let them do all that stuff that they're naturally going to do anyway? And so it's, for me, it's mostly about keep monitoring creativity killers, right? Like, what can I be doing to kill the creativity, and how do I make sure that I'm not doing that? So that's mostly how I manage that. Is I just go, how do I get out of the way? Like, how do I make sure that I'm not the person in the way, and how do I make sure that I'm modeling it as an adult for them to see how it can continue on throughout a lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love that. Love the modeling. And what we do is every now and then when we need to, we go on these technology fasts, which is, they can last anywhere from a month, maybe 40 days, maybe sometimes even more. And we're in the middle of it right now, which means that all the technology, which is TV, computers, phones, everything, it's reduced to a minimum use, and we use it only for the purpose. Like I'm doing right now, it's the purpose. And if we have to email the work or anything like that, it's just purposeful. And sometimes if we're satiated with technology in the clear cut of no more, we'll leave the kids with, oh man, what do we do now? Because, there's like, we've been watching this or watching Shark Tank or, things like that, and playing FIFA 15 or whatever it is that they're doing. So in that moment, they get really, really bored and they expect me to entertain them, which is not my job. And I tell them over and over again, but they do. So sometimes they go into reading right away. Sometimes they go into, well, they're older, so they're not playing, with toys and stuff, but, go outside. But every now and then it just so happens they're sitting around the house and not doing anything and being bored. Now, just on the second day of the beginning of this fast, what happened is that I read an article about boredom and how important it is to be bored, because after a certain period of boredom, your creativity, if you go and do something really creative, which is, write, paint, think, act on a new idea or anything like that, it's about 10 to 20% more so than if you were going to do it just out of, oh, I'm going to go and create something. It was an article compiling different studies from different educational places and universities, throughout the United States and Canada. And it was all, it all came from this professor at the Calgary University named Peter Tuohy, who actually wrote a book called Boredom, A Lively History. Yes, Boredom, A Lively History, which says that when you're bored, it makes you go inward. It makes you think. It makes you just kind of stare at the ceiling, but think about yourself, and also think about how you can help others. And it also makes you, it's a really, really valuable skill, basically, because not every time you're going to have something to do. Not every time you're going to have a pen and paper to write or phone to stare at or a book to read. Sometimes you're just going to be in the middle of nowhere with nothing, and you have to actually learn how to cope with that. And, we all know how distracted we are with different things and different sorts of, technologies today. So that's exactly what we did. That when they came to me and they said, we're bored, and I said, well, you know what, I am too. So let's just lie down on sofas and stare at the ceiling. And all three of us, my husband wasn't there at the time, all three of us, me and the boys, did exactly that for 15 minutes. As soon as we got up, Marco went on to do his homework. Luca went to write in his journal, and I went on to create a new recipe for dinner. So it was a really, really nice way to do it. Another thing that we do is we just done it actually in the car on the way back from our ski trip. Is one of us, I don't remember, I think there's a name of that game, but anyways, it's like when you start the story and you start the sentence, and each person says the story of the sentence. And at this point, there's a lot of soccer going on in the family, and a lot of players, and somehow some of the players always find their way into the story. But it's a really nice way, if you throw a theme for the story, to go and make them really think, and make them think quick. And that's what I like about it, because you have to think quickly if you're gonna, like you said, Antonio, if you're gonna advance into this world, which is coming into be as a creative class. So those are kind of two our new ways of doing it. And I can't think of anything else. You just go ahead and I'll think of something else that, we can give our viewers to, have a nice idea.
No, that's great. I really like um, your talk on boredom because I, and again, to paraphrase another quote, where we need to allow our children to rise to the call of boredom. And I work with a lot of parents on this, and they don't say that, my kids are bored. What they say is, I feel like I always have to do something with my kids. They're always wanting me and they're always needing me, and they just want to extricate themselves. And that's a real issue that comes up for many parents. And I realize that what is happening in that dynamic is the parent is feeling a sense of responsibility and guilt because, I don't know, maybe during the day they haven't felt that they spent enough time, or they've been busy, they have a lot of balls in the air. But there's something that's in them that's feeling unsettled with their child's boredom. So really, when Antonia talks about getting out of your child's way, part of that is recognizing that we often, even if our kids are bored, we tend to verbalize what they can do. Well, why don't you go paint a picture? Why don't you go play with what Santa bought you? Why don't you go and look, well, what about your doll? There's something that we're spoon feeding our children, so which is bad in itself because it creates externally directed children versus internally directed. So when you talk about, Mariana, being quiet and still for a while, but here's what actually how it plays out often. What happens is your child, and I've tested this with my children and certainly like parents that I work with, and I said there has to be something that the parent has at their disposal when they're hearing in their ear that their child is bored, because they are under a sense of anxiety and tension. So to speak to that and to give a really great how-to, that involves a certain amount of self-regulation that a parent needs to do first. Meaning that there is a moment where they go, their child is asking me for something, they want me to play with them, they want me to play this game, and I don't want to play with it right now. And how do I position that, in first of all, in my mind, so I'm not feeling guilty and anxious? And so the first bit is the self-regulation is to go in, and this is where you go to your breath, this is where you midline, this is where you look for sensations. It's a somatic thing where you calm your nervous system. Calm it down so you're not in a, I'm trying to cook a dinner, or I'm trying to talk to my husband and trying to, fix the problem. And then the next part is when you're calm, to bring to your mind that it is a gift. It is a joy for somebody to experience what emerges from boredom, what gift that is. And so what I've noticed is, for example, my husband and I might be talking in one of the living rooms, and the kids might come in and say, can you play with me, or can you play this game with me? And at that moment, remember, I'm not triggered because I've regulated. So I'm not going, I don't have time, I need some time. I'm not saying it like that. What I do is I go, you know what, right now I'm having a really great, interesting discussion. Or maybe if I was working, I'm working on my passion right now, right? And then I say, why don't you go find your passion? I don't spoon feed them anything. And then here's what happens though. They will come back. They will come back maybe 5 times. And again, if I'm triggered and feeling anxious wanting to fix it, then I'll end up fixing it for them and they lose the gift. So because I've already positioned it in my mind as it's a gift whenever my children are bored, after I've done my self-regulation, I tell them once, I've noticed it's usually almost 5 times they might come back. Sometimes, like nowadays, it might be 2 or 1. But there are times when it was 5 times they'll come back and they'll ask. And in that moment, I'll stick to my guns. But again, I'm untriggered as I'm saying this. And then if a parent can get past the 5 asks of, can you play with me? Can you do this with me? But doing it lovingly, doing it where you're not energetically pulling love away, doing it with your hand held, with standing in their power that they will figure it out, then what a parent will see emerge with their children is nothing short of magic. That is where you see the magic begin. That is where your kids, like, I saw them. They went and found all the old cardboard from down in the basement and created a time machine and spent hours on it because it was me talking about getting out of their way. It was me not looking to fix it, me not looking to be stressed and trying to do something I didn't want to do. And then, and then when you're feeling replenished and you're feeling fat and full of, I had my time to do something, then you can make your commitment to your kids about what you want to do. But I think the first place that has to be looked at is here. Getting out of their way begins here. How do we somatically regulate ourselves? And how do we stand in our child's power that this is a gift? And there's 2 parts to it. And if you do that, that will get people well on their way seeing their kids tap into their genius.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of there's a book called Drive by Daniel Pink that talks about what actually motivates human beings. And he said that, or he makes a very strong case in that book that we always think that we're reward motivated, right? We're always like stick or carrot motivated, like we're rewarded by, like I'm going to get this prize, or if I don't do this, somebody's going to be mad at me. He said that that's actually the lowest tier of motivation, human motivation. He said that we're actually authentically motivated by three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So autonomy is the ability to be self-directed, right? Like I get to decide what I'm going to do. Mastery is I'm going to be able to get to excellence on this thing. So I'm motivated to do it because I want to be the best at it. I want to be the best that I can be. And then purpose, which is I'm not going to get a prize, I'm not going to get a carrot, but this has higher meaning to me. If I do this, then this has a meaning that's more transcendent than it is concrete or material. And that's all humans, right? We don't actually get rid of that. We can't be trained out of that. When people are in careers or in businesses or contexts where the context allows them to have those three things, they outperform everybody else. Even if they're getting paid less, they outperform everybody else. So we can't actually have that beaten out of us. That is an intrinsic part of being human, is that we are motivated by those three, a combination of those three things. So when you look at us getting in the way of our children, we're almost always robbing them of one of those three things when it comes to creativity, right? Like we're hovering, we're surveilling them, we're putting all this pressure on them, right? So our surveilling, or like you were saying, well, why don't you go do this? Why don't you go do this? Why don't, like that whole teaching children to be extrinsically motivated, that's actually removing their autonomy from them. When we give them the gift of autonomy and they get to go figure out what they want to do on their own, that's actually one of the most satisfying intrinsic motivators a human being can have, is autonomy. I get to decide what I'm going to do. And then if we're constantly bribing them with prizes or creating win-lose scenarios, right? Well, if he does it first, then he gets an extra scoop of ice cream, right? And now we're creating competition between kids. That removes their ability to create mastery, right? Because now it's all about beating somebody else. It's not like I'm doing this because I want to become the best version of it myself. And all these other things that we do, like we restrict our kids, we over-control every little, every little way that they do it. Okay, but you can color, but you got to do it in the lines, right? Or you're allowed to color in this way, but you're not allowed to do it, like over here. And we've got all these provisions, right? And I honestly think when I do that, because I do it too, I just don't want the mess, right? Like I'm just trying to avoid mess. Like I try to avoid mess at all costs because my life is so busy. Like mess, just it's like one more thing. I just cleaned this room, and 15 minutes later, it's like a hurricane went through, and so I'm just trying to mitigate mess. But that's to make my life easier. But the reality is that when I'm trying to control how they're doing it, I'm removing what makes us distinctly human in our motivation. So that's, for me, getting out of my child's way is making sure that when they're taking on a project, I'm not removing autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I'm allowing it to be something bigger for them. Look, like you said, I made this time machine, right? Like that's a transcendent experience for a child to make a cardboard time machine. That's higher purpose stuff for them, to be able to let them do it however they want to. What we've done with Piper, my 2.5-year-old, is that she wanted to cut with scissors. And so she was stealing all of our adult scissors. Well, there's a couple different reasons why that could go terribly, terribly wrong. So we went and got Piper scissors, right? And they're safety scissors. And I know she's only 2.5, but they're safety scissors, and she loves to cut. So here, you can cut anything that's paper. You're not allowed to cut fabric, right? And that is a provision that we've made. But we make sure that there's paper everywhere. And if she definitely wants to create cloth, these are the cloths you can, like these are your materials. And these are Piper's materials. So you have ownership over them. And you can destroy them however you want to, right? Like cut cloth as long as it's Piper's cloth. Cut paper as long as it's Piper's paper, right? Like we want her to honor other people's objects. By the same token, we give her a ton of objects that she can destroy as many ways as she wants to. And she loves it, right? So she's no longer looking for our dangerous scissors and to cut that important piece of note that I needed for my class, right? Like she gets as much as she wants, and that she has total autonomy and mastery over it. Those are her things. So we try to create a context where we're out of her way. These are your things. You get to do whatever you want to. This is your world. If it gets destroyed, droid, you destroyed it, and that's, and then you get to understand what it means to destroy your own object, and you get to figure that out. But I'm just going to get out of the way. So that's usually the model I keep in my mind. Am I interrupting her mastery? Am I interrupting her autonomy? Am I interrupting her purpose? And that's always been that's my litmus test for whether or not I'm quote unquote in the way of her creativity.
I just want to add something really quickly to that, because you're talking about getting in their way. Sometimes when a child is fascinated by, whatever little material, like she's cutting the piece of paper, and in that moment she's in her world. And one thing that I think is really important for parents to be mindful of is how much even interrupting with dinner is an interruption to that magical space of neural connections that are taking place. So when you see a child that's highly engaged to the point that they're almost drooling because they're just so focused on what they're doing, recognize that is a magic moment for your child, and don't even bother to ask them in that moment. It's not about you. It's not about what else has to be done. Let those connections take place. Not even if they have to share a toy. If they're hogging the toy, let them hog it. It's not always right to share or something. Let them have that moment where it's magic before you rob from that, because to puncture that exquisite moment in time is to rob from your kids their genius and what's happening in their brain. Yeah, I just wanted to mention. Marianne.
Totally.
Yes, and what I'm hearing from the last time you spoke, Ria, and then Antonia, it's a lot that has to do with parenting and being conscious and being aware. And I think that's one of the reasons also why we're doing this and sharing our views and doing research about that, and people wanting to hear about that is how they can become more conscious about that and how they can become more conscious about parenting, because you really have to be on the higher level of consciousness in order to recognize the magic moment that your child is having, and you don't interrupt it with simply dinner because the dinner is ready, because it's 6 o'clock or whatever the time people eat dinner at their houses, and because it needs to be done because I have to move on to the next project and my child's magic moment is just in my way. Or what you're saying, Antonia, about, and I love that, thank you for that, I'll be using that, the motivation, the mastery and autonomy and the purpose. A parent really needs to be on the higher level of consciousness to understand, first of all, that those three are the better ways to motivate your child than the reward. Reward is the easiest one. You finish your homework, you'll get a piece of candy, or, you finish this, you'll get that. It's the easiest one, and very low, I don't want to say shallow, but, it comes off that way. But if you are aware of those three amazing ways, and then you actually are able to make it so, because we as adults, we will know that, obviously, oh, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing now. The child is not going to know that. So I love how you said this is Piper's scissors. You're still giving her autonomy that she has her own, and these are her papers and these are her cloth, but then she's not going to know, oh, okay, my mom is giving me autonomy. It's up to us to create the ways for our children in correlation with those three ways that are actually for them. I guess what I'm trying to say is boiling it down for the kids' way of doing it, for the kids' way of understanding it, for the kids' way of motivating themselves, and taking the prize, maybe not completely, I will still, keep the prize here and there because it's also one of the ways, but not solely motivating kids by prize. And I love what you said, Ria, about the magic moments, and I'm guilty of that, every now and then, just kind of, we're on the general has spoken, the orders are in, you gotta eat dinner and then go shower and go to bed, and not actually interrupting when my boys are having a really cool conversations with themselves. And actually I started kind of, one of my pet peeves before was that, when the lights are out, maybe you can talk for a few minutes and that's about it, because you have to get enough sleep. It's really important for them to get sleep, especially at this age. And sometimes I will catch myself going into the room after 10 or 15 minutes and forcefully telling them to, shut it and sleep, because, it's almost 9:30. Not realizing that they were having a magic moment, that Luca was teaching Marco something about, school or soccer or life or anything like that. And now I just kind of let them, and even if it's 10:30, maybe it's more important for them to have this kind of conversation that is going to light up their brain waves as opposed to them just sitting quietly and trying to fall asleep and not and thinking that their mom doesn't love them or doesn't allow them to communicate with each other and bond with each other. So I like that awareness that you brought up with the magic moment, and I'll definitely continue that.
That's really glorious. That's a really glorious example of that in action. And you know, um, when we when we're with our kids, and there's so many things that are coming together. You're right. It is about um, being conscious, and being conscious. A part of that is understand taking perspectives, right? So when you think about even what it is to be emotionally intelligent, we want our children to be emotionally intelligent. People will argue it's more important than IQ, that EQ is more important than IQ. Why? Because part of emotional intelligence is, well, it's self-regulation. So us regulating ourselves so we don't, um, and self-awareness, right? So we're aware of the feelings that we're having. We are able to regulate those feelings, and so they don't we don't shut down. We're not like the sky's falling mode. And empathy, which is the ability to take perspectives. All of these are really coming together. We talked about motivation, and Tony mentioned motivation. And Daniel Pink speaks about this, but London School of Economics did studies, like extensive studies on this, and they're not the only ones, about how rewards, it's not even the lowest common denominator, they don't work. The only time rewards work is for very basic step and action things. You can do this. But in any role or responsibility that involves any sort of complex or creative thinking, rewards do not work. And what the results show, which is really staggering, is that all this evidence, like it's indisputable evidence, that rewards don't work for complex and creative tasks. Why we still in the workplace, why we still in higher learning still continue with this. We do it as parents sometimes because we go, oh, well, if we offer them an extra cookie or offer them an opportunity, they're going to go for it. But very soon that currency will run out, So, really important. But one thing that I would love to, by the way, just getting back into some ideas about building this creativity, because we want to give our listeners a lot of how-tos. When you have young kids, like think about all, even from the toys, from the paint by numbers to the coloring books. Like I don't believe in coloring books at all. Get rid of them. There's no reason why you should ever have a coloring book in the household, because I'm so much more curious about what my child's perception of a bird is. Lopsided, purple, with 5 eyes is so much more interesting than Dora the Explorer's bird that's perfectly parroted and they have to color within those lines. So if I have the coloring books, our kids might gravitate towards them. But if you give them a blank piece of paper or a wall in your house, like I did growing up, like my parents said, a wall can be painted. Like, how far are you willing to go with this? Let them have to figure out from scratch what comes into their minds. So yeah, things like coloring books and paint by numbers, or anything like the type of toys that we're buying our children, what type of different ways can they see things and manipulate, which really brings me up to something that I'd love to ask you guys about. So, which I think is a really big part of creativity, and we can get into some really neat how-tos, is divergent thinking. So when we talked about earlier when we started about thinking outside of the box, and what does it mean to think outside of the box? I mean, people hear that all the time. It's like one of those real snazzy words. And when we think about divergent thinking, so divergent thinking is how people can see something from all different sides, like many different ways of seeing a problem, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're divergent thinking, you're looking at a problem from many different angles with many different hats. And as opposed to convergent thinking, where it's like a brainstorming, you brainstorm everything and then you converge to find one area that you want to go with. So I think part of creativity is the ability to brainstorm ideas, and there's no make wrongs, there's no shame, there's nothing that's incorrect. So how can we create situations where our children can brainstorm ideas and be put in an environment where everything that they have has a time and space to be heard and listened to? Because, I'll just share something really interesting about brainstorming that I happen to learn, that we often do brainstorming where we go, okay, everybody, brainstorming ideas now. What do you think? We're in an office place. What are all your ideas? And we scribe them. But one of the interesting thing about brainstorming is the studies show that if you brainstorm that way, I might not be feeling confident. I think that person's smarter than me. I think this person's more interesting. So all of a sudden, my genius set of ideas becomes, I'm worrying about what I'm putting out there. So they found that when you're brainstorming, if you really want to get to the genius, first, allow people to brainstorm autonomously for a while, so they can be unfettered by whatever judgments or feelings they have about anyone or anything else. That's one. And two, when they're brainstorming, what was the other one? When they're brainstorming, of course, like reserve judgment. Yeah, it is. God, it's going completely out of my head. But yeah. So, anyways, it'll come to me when it comes to me. But allowing people to just have a free flow of their ideas before they announce it to the space. And so that's something that as parents we can think about when we're brainstorming ourselves with our kids, like different ideas. Kids are comfortable in the context of their family, but in different group settings, there'll be educators that are watching this, there'll be leaders and there people that are dealing with other children. How can you allow all children to have a voice and not feel marginalized because they don't think their ideas as interesting? And we can all identify with that on this panel, where we've worried about, should I put up my hand? Will I look stupid? Is that a good idea? Am I smart enough? So something to just, but Antonia, to get to my question, I would love to hear your ideas on how we can encourage kids to think outside of the box, and what you understand from think outside of the box, and how you would encourage that with children.
So, I mean, I usually come from the lens of personality types and how different kids are going to manifest creativity differently. Most of the time when we're using the mental processes that generate creativity, especially the way that you defined it, like an original thought that has value, we use an intuitive part of our brain. There's an intuitive part of our brain that pattern recognizes, that sees something new emerge that it hasn't seen before, or it kind of gets an idea of putting together all these little pieces of the puzzle and then goes, oh, I think there's a new way of looking at this, like you mentioned. And there's two different styles of intuition that our brain uses. One is called an introverted style, and that was more like what you were talking about with like divergent thinking about things from all different angles, sort of watching your brain from these patterns and being able to take different perspectives. And that's a quiet process. Like you mentioned, when you're going to get true good creativity from everybody, you need to have a quiet time and a brainstorming time. And that's because some people do their best creative work in total silence. Like they have to have complete and utter sensory deprivation in order to get those really profound intuitive thoughts or those creative thoughts. Whereas other people use a different style of intuition that's called extroverted intuition. And extroverted intuition is about engaging with the environment and seeing patterns come from the environment. And it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter which personality type you are, you have access to one of these two styles of intuition. So if you've got a group, you want to make space for both of those styles, for the quiet, contemplative, intuitive style, and for the green light, throw ideas back and forth between each other, see what comes up, when we cross-pollinate our ideas. Now, there's some children that are going to lead with these intuitive styles as their primary way of learning. And they're going to be observed as the quote-unquote most creative kind of kid, right? Like those are the kids where like people will say, I mean, they're not getting great test scores, but man, they are creative, right? Look at all their creative stuff. And so there are certain children that just come out of the package having or gravitating towards those styles of creativity. And there's other kids that don't. That's a more muted part of who they are. It's still there inside of them, but it's a quieter voice, and they tend to be the ones who want to do things right? That's just their personality. Their personality says, is this right? As opposed to, is this new, right? Doing things right is more important than doing things new. So think of creativity as almost like intelligence. Like not all of us are built equally intellectually, right? Like we all have different levels of IQ, but we all come out of the hatch with the ability to be intelligent. So a lot of it isn't so much what our natural IQ is. A lot of it, when it comes to intelligence, is have we been fostered to appreciate and utilize our intelligence? Have we seen it as a muscle to be exercised? It's the same thing with creativity. We don't all have the exact same levels of creativity out of the hatch, but we all come with the ability to be creative. So it's about creating a context where that intuitive creativity can emerge and feel good. And the number one thing I was thinking as you were mentioning these things is I think what the most important thing we can do as parents is generate a feeling of safety within the child. Like you were saying, I might not feel confident about my creative idea. That's really saying I'm not feeling safe about sharing it. And so, what are all the things that we do as parents to create a safe environment for our kids? We before in Grow Great Live talked about like the helicopter parent that makes sure that the kid never has any bumps and bruises, and that's a feeling of safety. When really, as humans, we know we're safe when we have a roof over our heads, when we have food in our bellies, when we don't have to worry about whether or not those things are going away, and when we have complete and total safety of love in our family. When we're not at each other's throats, when we're not arguing all the time, when they're not going, does mom and dad love each other? Like, are they okay? Like, do they love me? When all that stuff is just handled for the kid. The kid knows that they're in a totally safe context, that the food and clothing is not going away, that mom and dad love each other, or mom loves the kids, or dad loves the kids if you're in a single parent household, or whatever it is. All that stuff is just handled, right? And now when we know that all that, we don't have to worry about all that other stuff. And especially if we get like, our love languages addressed, as in like we know we're experiencing love because our parents are communicating, or we're communicating as parents to the child love in a way that they understand, right? So understanding our child and providing what they need in order to feel safe, then their creativity has a beautiful canvas to just like start, flourishing. If they're worried about things like money because they overheard mom and dad arguing about money, or if they're worried about mom and dad, at each other's throats, or if they're worried about, mom for any reason, now they're going to be a lot less secure about just letting their creativity run wild, because now they've got adult problems to think about, right? Like they're like, how do I get my parents together, or how do I make sure that we get food, even though the 7-year-old cannot do that, right? That's what they're going to be thinking about. So it's really about making sure that you're getting all their intrinsic human needs met, so they feel just safe. They feel just intrinsically safe. I was thinking about, if I may just, like for just one moment, I was remembering a study I read where they took kids in a playground and observed their behavior in playgrounds where there was no fence versus a fence around the playground. And they noticed that children that didn't have a fenced playground stayed really close to the center of the playground. But children that had a fence started they basically utilized the entire space within the fence, right? Like they would all the way out to the fence because the fence made them feel safe. But when they didn't have a fence, they didn't feel safe, so they kind of huddled together in the middle of the playground. So as parents, if we can do what I oftentimes is called secure the perimeter, right? Like make them know that you've got it handled, right? Like within this context of this household, like nothing is going to impact you because I'm not going to let it, right? Like I'm going to protect you completely. That is my job as a parent, is to make you feel completely protected, right? Like you're getting all your needs met. And so now the kid is just like way more open to explore within that perimeter, right? The perimeter is secured. I don't have to worry about that, right? I don't have to worry about someone coming in and getting me. I know that's safe. I know I'm gonna have a roof over my head, food in my belly. My parents are very happy with each other, or my parents, are showing a lot of love to me. And now I have a lot more space to feel secure in my creative process.
I just want to say something really quickly about that. It's not just Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's not just the food, shelter, clothing. It is where is that child emotionally, which means that the parent might have to do some work. Dan Siegel said, the number one predictor of how your child will do is how well you've understood your inner mind such that you understand your child. Which I think is the best. That is at the heart of that is understanding our blind spots, understanding our biases, understanding our insecurities, understanding everything that mom and dad to wound us. They loved us to pieces, but wound us. And we have all of our little crazies that come up, and no one's going to trigger them more than our kids. And who do they have to feel safe from? Because, unless we're in the third world, they're getting food, shelter, and clothing, right? It is how well are they protected from us? When they say something and we're growly, when they say something and we project shame and judgment and insecurity and whatever, because it's all of us, that is work, people. There's the thing. But it's glorious work. It's epic work. That is the work that allows everyone around you in your entire life to win. That is your children, the man down the street, your husband, your wife, and every friend you've ever known. And it requires an immense amount of courage, because what I have to do now is ask my husband, what do you see that I don't see? Where am I trying? But you know what? and ask the question, because I will never see a blind spot. That's why it's called a blind spot. I have to ask the people I trust. Wouldn't we love if we had friends where we could say, I'm really working on myself. I'm really working on this friendship. I want to be the best parent and human being possible. I ask you, what is it about me that might be showing up that isn't optimal? And then have the courage to listen to it and thank them for it and take what you can from that and add it to your arsenal and better yourself so that you can lead your children where they need to go. Free, unfettered, without any barnacles hanging off of them. That is work. But again, it's exquisite work. Sorry, I just...
No. Well, I was, just to add to that, the assumption, I think the reason why I was mentioning Maslow is because it's, I mean, I wasn't mentioning it by name, but if anybody wants to go look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a pyramid shape, and it talks about the basic human needs that we have, and when we get one met, we automatically graduate to the next one. And so the reason why I was mentioning it without naming it is you would think that kids would always feel secure that they're going to have a roof over their heads and food in their bellies until their parents are fighting about money in front of them. So basically what you're talking about is, yeah, always be working on the self, always be understanding who you are, but be really conscious that your stresses, I mean, your kids are modeling you all the time, right? Like, you want them to read in front of them. If you're arguing about money in front of them, you will teach your kids to be stressed out about money. Like, that's how you're teaching them. So these things seem really intuitive, and yet as parents, I know that I offend them all the time. So it's a matter of going, look, if I want my kid to be really creative, if I want them to be competitive in the upcoming emergent world, right? If I want them to be truly self-directed, autonomous, masters and purposeful human beings, then I got to make sure that I'm not like, hey, did you pay that bill? Why didn't you pay that bill? Right? Like, and arguing about money in front of them. So it's a matter of making sure they feel totally safe in their context. It's not their job to worry about that stuff. You're the parent. You need to worry about that. And then what you're talking about with, like, making sure that you understand yourself and you're not putting all that shame and guilt and fear and anger all on top of them, I see that as the love and belongingness need. I see that as truly giving them the kind of love that they can receive and feeling loved, loving yourself. All that's, in my opinion, love and belongingness. So it's like making sure that you're feeling fully safe in love. So, I mean, you can take the model, because it's easy to remember, you can take that model and apply it. You can go more granular in your personal development. Like, Ria, that's one of the greatest things about you being a parent, a teacher to parents, is that it is so imperative that we never rest on our laurels when it comes to our individual personal development as parents. So you can take it as high up as you want to, but just remember the easy stuff. Don't fight about money in front of your kids. Like that seems intuitive, but we all do it. So it's like making sure you just remember that stuff. I think that's why I mentioned it. Mariana, we haven't talked to you in a while.
Hi.
We've been talking.
I just want to, quickly before we wrap, I want to answer the Ria's question. How do you help your children? How do you teach your children to safely, express their ideas in any kind of environment, starting with your own at home, and then the school, and then any kind of environment they will find themselves later on in life? Is what I'm hoping to learn my boys, to teach my boys, is that what your truth is that you're creative, number one, and number two, that you're resourceful. And if your idea gets discarded by anybody or at any given time, it's because it was not the time or the place for that idea. It's simple as that. I think it's one of the biggest building blocks for the confidence. Once you have all the needs met, like Antonia said, and they feel safe, and they wave their hands, and they want to express themselves, and during the brainstorming session, adding that dimension of what I know, I am creative and I am resourceful and I have great ideas. One of my ideas wasn't accepted at this point because it was just not a time or a place for that idea to be accepted and acted upon. Simple as that.
That's magnificent, and I love it. You can always add that into like a personal mantra, right? As that they can carry with them. But just with regards to, recognizing that things don't always work out for them. The idea is not always chosen, and they're not always recognized. But that, you've pinpointed something really important, and something that I think is worth sharing is, we can say that and give lip service to that, but when the child is feeling anxious that their idea didn't get chosen, inside of them, somatically, they have and anxiety and a stress factor. And now becomes how well we can equip our kids with the self-talk. So what self-talk? What can we arm our children with and actually walk through? What can you tell yourself when things aren't, when they're not even in that situation? What can you tell yourself when you're in that moment? You're almost anticipating the future. When the teacher says, oh, we're not going to go with that, or the friend says, no, we're not going to play that game. And you role play it out. You role play. You let them embody the feeling. You talk to them, not let them have their first shot at what they can use in their self-talk dialogue, and you can always supplement if they need some coaching on that. And that way, when they go out into the world, because to not recognize they are going to feel a bit anxious and they're not going to feel a bit sad, now they have something at their disposal. Oh, I've been here before. Mom walked me through this, and this is what I can say to myself, and this is how I'm going to feel inside. And where does it even feel? Where is that in their body? Where's that tension of I'm feeling less than? I'm not feeling interesting. I'm not feeling that my idea is smart enough. Where does that live so that they can process it out? This is where kids' self-regulation comes in. So as we self-regulate, teaching them that it is a sensation. A feeling is something you feel. It's in their body. So the more that they can attach those fears to something in their body gets them off to the races. Yeah,
For sure.
So it's we probably should do some final thoughts on creativity, and I just, while we wrap up and talk about some final thoughts, I think the one thing that I want to reiterate is the importance of teaching our children to exercise the muscle of creativity. It is no longer nice to have. It's no longer a luxury of childhood or a privilege of childhood that, oh, look, those were the salad days and we were able to be super creative then, but now we got to be serious adults. Like, the world is changing around us. Technology changes faster than we can keep up with it. We are entering a time period where creativity is going to be as imperative as the ability to read a watch. We no longer concede as a luxury or a privilege. It is going to be an absolute imperative in the world. Right now it's becoming an imperative. How many kids do we have with college degrees that are like, flipping burgers? Like, creativity is becoming the currency of the world. And so to not foster this in your children is giving them a massive disadvantage. It's like robbing them of a sense, really. So that's the one thing I want to reiterate as my final thought, is to recognize that it really should be possibly one of the biggest focuses of the most important characteristics that we're fostering our children, is making sure that they have that space to understand and learn and grow the muscle of creativity.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yes. My final thought would be, as parents, asking ourselves, what am I doing with my life to make it better? How am I looking? How many ways am I looking at my life to make it better and to make it more interesting and to make it more creative and to make it more passionate and to have more purpose and to motivate myself in different ways? And just like Antonia said, you want them to read, surround yourself with books. You want your kids to be creative and foster that skill that is going to serve them in life. You get creative yourself, and then work with them around that. How many different ways we can get to work from here or to school from here? How many different ways you can juggle the ball, and how many different ways you can make the meal, or or whatever it is that works for you. Just look at yourself, and then it will transcend to your kids.
My final thought is that I'd like to impart is that the world is most definitely changing. And what we used to think was, if my child just followed and got really focused on math and the sciences, or certain humanities, that they're going to have a job. That world has changed. The storytellers, the poets, I believe, are going to be the people that sit in the boardroom. And because we think in terms of stories, and in a global world where information is on tap, who are the people that can understand the conversation that's happening under the conversation? Who are the people, when you have different languages and different cultures, that can express an idea that other people can latch onto in the form of a story, such that they can impart ideas across vast expanses of different cultures and languages? It is those people. And so we have a vested interest to right now build that skill in our kids, build the storytelling ability, build their creative genius, so that they have a chance. That is what's going to give them to an edge. Because right now we've already seen, bare minimum used to be university. School was preparing you for university. Then you have to have your MA, and now it's like you're going to need a PhD. What is going to really allow kids to survive
Mm-hmm.
is that skill. So it has been an absolute pleasure talking about this. It's certainly an exciting topic that we all got really passionate about. We would love to hear your ideas about creativity. What are you doing to increase the creativity in your home? Please share it with us, because we'd love to have other parents read about it, but we'd love to take some new ideas on ourselves. So please make a point to comment in the comment section, and looking forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks for your time.